Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome or welcome back, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner at Deloitte. Today is May 16th, 2024, and we are here for another episode of our Tectonic Conversations. Today, I am very excited. I have a very, very special guest. This particular conversation I was looking forward to for a couple of months since we've been agreeing to put this together. I am thrilled to welcome David Linthicum. David, thank you very much for finding the time to join us. I know you are in high demand these days.
I guess that depends on who you're talking to, but I appreciate the compliment. It's amazing to be here. I've always been on this show before. I've been a fan of this show. I'm a consistent watcher of this show. Everybody holds it in high regard, and it's an honor to be here.
You're very kind, David. So, ladies and gentlemen, David is a globally recognized thought leader and innovator and influencer on all things cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And over his career of 30 plus years in tech, David has published 17 books on the topic. He's a best-selling author, over 7,000 articles. And I just heard this morning the latest number, 72 LinkedIn courses on the topic, on the tech topic of cloud, artificial intelligence, and so forth. So truly a prolific thinker and producer of great insights, educator as well, should I say, and evangelist on these important topics. So thank you very much for joining us, David. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, combining the cloud's architectures with generative AI and unpacking sort of how does one approach building the right architecture for generative AI in the cloud. So very timely, very relevant topic. I look forward to that conversation. Now, we will be recording this session, of course, but for those of you who are with us today, this is a live show. So please feel free to submit any questions you might have to David and I, and we'll do our best to cover them. So with that, David, I'll pass the baton over to you. I look forward to hearing what it is you have to say on this particular topic.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I've been focusing on AI kind of as an architectural pattern actually since I was 18 years old, and I'm 62 years old now, believe it or not. So it's and the reason why is because AI kind of came in and came out of the scene when it had the computer. My first job out of college was as a decision support application analyst, worked for Boeing Computer Services, and actually did Lisp programming, which was kind of the first generation of AI. And there was that and M1 around and things like that. Borland had some tools when the PC came around. And I was always interested in the fact that we could use this stuff, which would actually build knowledge engines versus procedural code. And what happened was, certainly back in the 80s when I first got into it, it became just way too expensive. So in other words, the systems I was building, many of them for the government and the DoD, they were, $20 million a copy, which was way out of the budgetary constraints of the organization. So when you think about what's changed, since 1988 and now in 2024, it's really the fact that it's affordable. Now, the power is there as well, but the fact of the matter is we couldn't afford using this technology is because of the amount of power that was required to make these things work, to make the inference engines work. Even today, in building an LLM, and I just found this out yesterday, I was studying capacities of various systems. They take normally between 10 and 20 days to build. These are the modern LLMs like Llama and Chat GPT, and they cost in the range of $10 million of resources when they build them in the cloud. So you can imagine getting a $10 to $12 million bill, just from accumulating and building a parameter table from training data. But in that case of Chat GPT, they're training from the include all the text and information that's on the open internet, and kind of that's how it happens. So the focus now, I think, on the generative AI side is kind of beyond the hype, is figuring out what's real and how to use this stuff in order to get to the promises. I mean, I don't know, Talibor, you tell me, do you think this stuff is overhyped? Do you think that we're probably overly focused on it and not necessarily looking at the core business value of it?
I do. I think it is in a hype cycle, and it's at the high end of the hype cycle. I 100% agree. Um, However, uh, I think that the hype is for a reason. This actually feels, to those who are just now discovering the capabilities, this really feels science fiction. This feels incredible. This feels like something that has never been there before. So I think that it is on the top of the hype, but there is a sense that something big has actually happened, and there something new is upon us, which I think also adds an element of concern and excitement at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think what's kind of neat and kind of concerning at the same time with the whole industry is the fact we're probably moving at double the speed of cloud adoption. You know, back in 2009, 2010, when the cloud first kind of came around and started to, pick up and accelerate. That's going about twice, if not three times the speed as that. And also, the cloud intellectual property development stuff and the cloud services has been push toward all generative AI stuff. You will go to the cloud conferences now, they're generative AI conferences
Yeah.
by default. And the concern there, being kind of a cloud pragmatist and someone who's focused on, how enterprises can use that, is we could be displacing some of the research and development needs to be done on the basic cloud services that are out there, storage, compute, databases, things like that, in focusing on the generative AI stuff. That's one side of the card. So the concern needs to be there needs to be a balance there and making sure we're putting the innovative development in both sides of the cloud providers, as well as the AI side, as well as the traditional services side. But I do foresee, to your point, on the other side, however, we're going to see companies that are going to be transformed by this technology. The ability to have supply chains that are able to make almost perfect decisions with perfect information. Obviously, we saw during the pandemic, supply chains had some problems that we had to get around. The ability to have intelligent driving, perfect logistics management, the ability to get from point A to point B in very more efficient ways, the ability to turn this stuff into sustainability so we can run households and run factories much more efficient, much more power efficient ways. All that capability is there. And it's been there since I think the machine learning thing started to come around and we started to have reduction in the cost of leveraging this stuff.
Mhm.
The reason generative AI took off like a rocket is people could use this stuff. Generative means I'm generating stuff. I'm generating things that are useful to me. Audio files, text, write a thank you note to your grandmother. All those sorts of things are possible with that technology. And so people are finally seeing the fact that they can take this thing and move it to the next level and really kind of solve some issues there. The big thing is that I'm seeing people, kind of fall out of the cart on these days, and I wrote about this in InfoWorld a bunch of times, is picking the right use cases. I think everybody sees generative AI very much like they saw the cloud. We're making a lot of the same mistakes, and they're trying to over apply it in different things, different business domains. So I'm seeing things that are normally transactional systems like accounting systems, sales order entry systems, things like that,
Yeah.
where they're trying to build them holistically, as LLMs. And that's not necessarily going to be a good thing. I understand why they're doing it because, suddenly I want to, build something using this technology to make it neat. And obviously there's some advantages in leveraging generative AI technology in all kinds of applications. But keep in mind, this is going to be 3 to 5 times as expensive to build and run as traditional systems. Obviously, people talk, the GPU stuff, shortages there, the expense of that, the ability to build, deploy, continuously improve these LLMs within the system. They're not going to be cheaper to build. They're going to be far more expensive to build, far more expensive to run. People are typically going to run them in the cloud, and that's going to be a fairly expensive environment to run. They're going to charge you for the resources you use, which is going to be a great deal. So I think the big thing is for organizations now to figure out what the use cases that they need to apply this in, the things are going to be more viable and do so in a strategy. So are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing people just trying to over applying this stuff? Are you seeing, are they thinking through these use cases in a careful way? Or do you think it's going to be a couple of years before this boils down to we have a more of a pragmatic understanding of how this stuff should be used and not used.
So I think that what I'm observing here on this side of the market is that I think everybody has stood up teams to explore opportunities here, and where we see initial successes are in use cases that are focused on optimization and efficiency gains, right? This is where everybody has started. Now, what is interesting, so we sort of are now a year and a half behind the moment of reveal, and many organizations, I think, are rightly so focusing on those, which I think is this is correct, right? That's where people ought to be thinking. How do I optimize? How do I do what I do typically better, faster, more accurately? So optimization and productivity. But what is interesting is that we are starting to see now organizations come up with different questions. Is there a way for me to leverage this technology, these concepts, for actually revenue generation, for growth as well, right? So I think that what we're seeing is that everybody is on the bus, right? Majority of people seem to be focused on how do I leverage this for optimization and productivity and efficiency. But then leading organizations are also contemplating where are the new sources of revenue? How can this help me actually grow my business?
Yeah, and I think that's which should be a core indicator of the use case. It should be has strategic value to the business and the ability to grow the value of the business, not just revenue. By the way, we're talking about value. One of the studies that Deloitte did before I retired was the fact of the matter is that people are doing digital transformations to get to more of a value state. So in other words, they're able to change the technology and the ability to leverage the technology as a true force multiplier to get to different levels of value. Now, it was independent of their ability to get to different levels of revenue, because revenue is going to come along as a secondary benefit from you increasing the value. People are going to come to your system because you have a better customer experience, you have a better manufacturing process, you provide better quality materials. In this case of generative AI, we just mentioned when you're able to drive your supply chain, it's able to get things done faster and quicker, your ability to get to more of a higher quality state, your ability to optimize manufacturing, which is going to lower your prices and raise your quality. And those are the prime benefits of using this technology for the strategic value of the business. I think the danger is, and I'm seeing some of this when I review some of the use cases that are coming back from the cloud providers. They're saying these are 10 examples of how people are using our generative AI technology to build today. They have a tendency to be very tactically focused, not something that's going to have strategic value to the business. And I understand why that is and why they're building these things. They're trying to get expertise and run this stuff as a prototype. But I think the core architectural weight of the decision needs to be the fact that this needs to be has a key strategic advantage from the business, understanding that the investment is going to be very high for this. And you're also, in many instances, going to have to find additional resources and money and funding to get some of this stuff done. And you're going to have to present this to a board of directors. Those are very hard meetings to have. They're going to ask lots of questions, and you have to really kind of define where the value is and the ability to kind of guide the decisions that are being made there. Now, people are saying, well, we're 2 years into this, Dave, and we're not at the point of making those kinds of decisions yet. So we're just getting familiar with the technology. I agree. That's 100% true. However, the expense of this technology being, again, 3 to 5 times the amount of building a traditional system, and the investments that need to be made normally with organizations that aren't increasing their IT spending by much, the importance of having these sorts of discussions and having this sorts of planning meetings and the ability to look at this as a business, I think is a good idea before we start making some of these mistakes that can be expensive. You think about it, if you look at the adoption of cloud, I'm seeing many of the mistakes being repeated. In other words, people adopted cloud, they moved lots of stuff into cloud, lots of applications in the cloud, they were lifted and shifted. There wasn't a lot of forethought and planning in terms of what they were going to build on cloud. They were just moving everything and anything to the cloud that they could. And the reason for that was much the same. They wanted to leverage this new technology, and they found these use cases that were the low-hanging fruit, and those are the applications that they ended up moving there. And then here we are in 2022, after the pandemic started to slow down, we got a bill from the cloud providers, and that because they bill for the resources we use. If those applications weren't optimized for the cloud, or we picked the wrong applications to move to the cloud, it was going to be a higher
Yeah.
spend and lower value that we saw.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the repatriation stuff is going on. It's really normalization of the systems. And I think it's good for everybody, including the cloud providers, because people are going to be able to use cloud in a much more optimized way. We're normalizing things moving forward. I'd rather not go through that with this. I'd rather, and we're going to go through some of it, but I'd rather reduce the amount of applications that are going to end up removing some of the generative AI capabilities out of in 5 years, because the decision was made to build an application using generative AI technology, which was probably done for the wrong reasons. And so you get into this benefit, this trade-off. What are your ideas there?
I was going to say, like, this is actually a very, very important insight that you just brought up now. This is very important insight. I think that we are at risk of repeating this because there is, I think, the fear of missing out. The pressure is actually now coming from boards who are asking their executive, what are we doing with Gen AI and AI? Are we going to be missing out on things? Are we going to be left behind? Which then puts further pressure on IT leaders to actually do something about AI and Gen AI specifically. I can completely see the spiral occurring, which is exactly what you said. This is kind of the version of what happened in the cloud, but probably 5 times faster, right? Because when cloud emerged as an architectural concept, it was interesting, but it wasn't as revolutionary as this is. And it wasn't on the front pages of every airline magazine like this is. And it wasn't talked about, thing that can end civilization or make life beautiful or chaotic like this is. So I think that there is a real risk, and I'm really glad that you bring this up, because I think it's really, really good and important for everybody to appreciate what could be the negative outcome of this rush to Gen AI solutions. Because as you suggested, these solutions are actually very expensive. They cost a lot. And we can very quickly break the bank without actually getting to the point where the value is generated. So what you're suggesting really is organizations taking a step back, not rushing in, but taking a step back, learn from what happened with the cloud, and then thoughtfully be explicit about what is the purpose, where will this work, what is the right business case. Let's try something cautiously, prove the point, get the value, move on, and then sort of move the momentum that way. That's what I'm taking out from your.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you nailed it. You nailed it. And I'm just thinking, some of the mistakes that were made back in the early days of cloud were that the technicians, the technical managers are the one that made the decisions to move to cloud. They didn't normally involve the executives. The executives knew that cloud was a good thing to do, but they're the ones who made a decision in terms of what applications were going to move to the cloud and how it needed to be done. I think this feels like the fact we have to have a collaboration between the technical managers, the CTOs, the CIOs, the boards of directors, and the
Yeah.
CEOs in terms of figuring out the value and coming to a common understanding of what value it is. If we're going to spend 5 times the money, which by the way is going to be cheap, if we get 100,000 times the value that comes back, and I think what we're going to see that in some instances.
Yeah.
Then we need to figure out, everybody has to have a meeting of the minds in terms of what the risks are, what the opportunities are, and how to manage those effectively and efficiently. And I think that we need to have a different kind of an organizational operating model and changes, collaboration, understanding, and how we do that. And that may be missing now. So I think that would be my advice to people who are looking at this stuff. Are you communicating with the executives? Executives, are you communicating with your technical leadership to make sure we have a meeting of the minds and how we're leveraging this technology strategically? I understand everybody wants it,
Yeah.
but the way you direct it, there are a limited number of resources in the right way strategically is going to be fundamental to whether you succeed or not succeed in this. Because I do see people putting a lot of money and time in building the wrong applications in generative AI and then not having the resources to build the right applications in generative AI. And that's going to hurt them tremendously. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think that the success will be marked by what was your first experience like, right? So we better make sure that what we're going to light up first is going to actually be delightful and will be creating value. So I think you're right. If the first attempt fails, that could be that could be catastrophic, right?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes with many zeros on the end, as
With
my
many
old
zeros. Yeah.
boss used to say. But again, there's a reason to run the risk in some of this stuff because I think we're going to find value that's going to be many zeros as well. So the risks are going to be higher, and even though we made some strategic mistakes in using of cloud computing, they weren't necessarily going to derail the company. They were adjustments we can make. If you look at repatriation right now, it's just spending money in a different way to host
Yeah.
a particular application in a different place. And obviously the stuff in the cloud, for every application that moves off the cloud to a replacing it. So nobody's going to find a deficit in this. Now,
But I wanted to just say, David, you just triggered me with that comment that yes, the repatriation of the cloud is actually that is not going to sink the company. That is, I think, really important to call out. Wrong leveraging of Gen AI technology can actually turn into a catastrophic circumstance for a company. Uh, Perhaps not technically, but reputationally, right? So, that adds the criticality of being very mindful and thoughtful of which actually use cases do you pick, and how do you ensure that even if you pick the right use case, that the outcome is going to be net positive for the organization. I think we all remember what happened not a couple of months ago, right? With some, with a large, organization coming up with a solution that was so rotated on trying to extract the bias that it became biased, right? So these are the types of things that I think this technology puts all of our organizations at risk. That something gone wrong could actually have material impact fast on the business itself, which is not the case with other aspects of tech and architecture, right?
no, it's not. I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head. So, this is one of those things where you're making a decision that shouldn't be taken lightly. And so sometimes you need to reach out to some external resources, to a Deloitte or, somebody else who has the expertise. That's going to be important. I think another problem we have here is that there's a skill shortage now. We don't necessarily have the technical talent in many of these enterprises that are able to assist in making these decisions. And that's a common complaint I get from enterprise leadership right now. They can't find the people that are really going to take them down these paths. Now we're building them as quickly as we can. The mentoring generative architecture course I'm doing for Go Cloud Clear, it's packed, and obviously we're going to spit out some good architects on the end of that. But that's going to take a while before they get acclimated and get the skill sets, get the on the job training before they're able to provide a lot of value in making these decisions. Now, another thing that we need to consider is availability of data. One of the stopping points I see with generative AI that many enterprises are going to experience, and where some enterprises are going to accelerate, is availability of good quality training data that's going to be able to build these LLMs specific to the company, small language models in many instances, tactical use of generative AI, as well as participate in the other LLMs and their ability to build those and extend those capabilities out as well. So suddenly we're looking at data as a core hindrance or a core advantage in terms of leveraging generative AI, to the point that if the data is not in a good state, it's bad hygiene, it's erroneous, it has no single source of truth, which enterprises seem to have right now, that could be a stopping point for your ability to leverage generative AI until you go to the back end and fix the data. And I think what happened was, in many enterprises, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, they've been kicking the can down the road in actually fixing their data. And so in other words, they build systems on top of systems on top of systems on top of systems, and not necessarily look holistically in terms of what needs to change in terms of the ability to have a single source of truth, good quality information, all those sorts of things. So all these data exists in silos, and they operate within silos, and they function within silos. When you're looking at training data, you need petabytes of information that comes into this data that builds the LLMs for the particular purpose that makes them, worthwhile. And, I wrote about this a bunch of times. If we don't have that data that's in good working order, in good shape, we're not going to be able to build the LLMs. And on many instances, I think people have a false understanding. They think that we can fix the data within the domain of the generative AI system. Normally, that's not possible. If the data's not there, It's not in the quantity we need. The generative AI system can't create the data. It uses data. And so we have to think about availability, quality information of this stuff, and the ability to kind of get our data into a good shape to make these systems work better. And one of the advice I give when I lecture on generative AI is before you start working on this, and as you're ramping up your generative AI capabilities, ramp up your data science capabilities, ramp up your data administration capabilities, and let's finally get some of these things fixed. The great thing is the technology we have today, and certainly a lot of the AI-driven things, it's not going to be a very difficult thing to fix the stuff. It's going to take 3 months to 6 months for many enterprises, but you're going to have to get this done first before you start installing these systems. What are your thoughts on this?
This I think is the wall through which organizations can no longer pass. There's no more excuses for postponing governance of data, cleanliness of data, availability of data. I'm not sure, David, if you are aware of any emerging solutions and systems that could be a broker for the data that might be disordered, and if there is anything that is perhaps coming along those lines to help. Nothing that I am aware of. I think that from my vantage point, this was the final sort of moment where organizations do need to actually go through the hard and often tedious work of organizing, clearing, organizing, sorting, and governing their data.
Yeah, I think it's unavoidable, and I know sometimes they play the designated buzzkill in this industry, but the ability to go back and fix it is going to be an imperative for you to get any kind of value out of this technology. And the point you made earlier, there's additional tools you can leverage. There's data virtualization, data abstraction tools, data hygiene tools, metadata management tools, and they're very capable on these systems. They are going to require some planning. They are going to require some data architecture. They are going to require a very good assessment of the existing as-is state to figure out what the to-be state needs to be, where the data is going to be of value to these generative AI systems that need the information. So this is a matter where the AI architects, the AI engineers are working, and the data scientists are working with the current data administrators, the chief data officer within the company, and we seem to have that person in most of the large organizations today, where we come to an understanding as to what state they need to be and put together a plan in terms of what the deficit is and what needs to be improved. I think the thing that concerns me there is normally that comes with a lot of political weight behind it, because you're telling the CDO that the data is not in good shape and it's kind of your baby's ugly thing when you're really not saying that. You shouldn't say that. This is a matter of the fact that we're evolving the data. The data use is going to be used for some unanticipated use to train, a generative AI system. So we're putting another requirement on you, and we're going to give you funding and the resources you need to go off and fix the information. Good news is that it has value beyond just the use of generative AI. In other words, the use of applications, the use in data analytics, the use in inline business processes, a lot of the things that drive people nuts in enterprises today because they can't get the information they need out of this massive data that exists within the enterprise. They don't have a semantic understanding what a customer is and what an invoice is and what a product is. And we can finally get that under control. And then the advantage on the generative AI side, we're training the information with reliable information, which is going to lead us to more value in the knowledge models that we're building and the LLMs we're building. And I think it's kind of a win-win. But I think there's going to have to be more of an investment in data quality improvement and data security improvement and data governance improvement, to the point you made, and I should have written that on here, availability, integration, all these sorts of things. And it's not necessarily going to be the huge slog that people think it's going to be based on the tools out to today. So I just think it's an imperative that we make this investment. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I love hearing you say that from your experience and what you're saying, that enterprises can solve for this today relatively quickly, that this could be a 3 to 6 month intense effort to sort this out, and then you're set. We drew a parallel between cloud and Gen AI earlier on, sort of let's not get into the same issue, which I think is a very, very insightful thing. This last conversation we just had about the importance of clearing the data and investing in data, which is not sexy, but is essential, is similar to the discussions I feel we've had a number of years ago on the whole concept of CMDB. And for those who actually made that investment and did that right, how much were their organizations propelled in truly being able to run IT as the business, so how much value that created, that existence of CMDB, for example, for organizations to truly sort of extend their enterprise service management capabilities and insights into running IT organizations. But it was seen as such a tedious, complex, long process that many organizations did not have the ambition, appetite, or should I say vision, to invest in. So I think that this is also, I don't want us to be in that space with this. I think organizations have to finally say, look, we can no longer afford, we have to make this investment. We have to wrap our hands properly around our data. So I would agree, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a matter of breaking it down into small tactical projects that are less than 6 months. I think if anything's longer than 6 months, it has a tendency to people lose interest in it. It's hard to staff it, and it ends up failing. So this is going to be lots of tactical projects that get you to a better state of data. This isn't going to be, the data improvement project, which is going to go on for 3 years. I think that's never going to work, even though I think people are making they have a good idea to fix the information, but it's not necessarily going to have a pragmatic use case within the enterprise, just because it just becomes too complex unto itself. Let's talk about what people love to talk about with generative AI, and that's scalability and performance. Most common question I get after a GenAI class or a GenAI lecture is, what's the best GenAI? Or which GPU platform should I run? And you get into the scalability and performance of this, which becomes a challenge, but I think it's a reasonable challenge that I think a lot of enterprises can overcome. I think the big thing, and just to kind of go against where the common thinking is, everything seems to be GPU focused. You got to remember, you don't necessarily have to run every generative AI system on a GPU-based server. They can run on CPU servers just fine. There's a reason to run them on both. And so your ability to match the scalability and performance you need to the platforms you need, whether it's in the cloud or on premise, is going to be a core architectural challenge that I think people need to look at. And I think enterprises, at least in the first generation of generative AI systems that I see, seem to be overbuilding this stuff. So in other words, they're using 1,000 GPU clusters to run a very small tactical purpose use of generative AI system or machine learning based systems. And I understand why they're doing that. If you open up a technical journal, they'll talk about, the GPU companies are going like gangbusters and there's reason for leveraging them. But, this is a matter of matching the right processor resource, the right server resource, server brand, the right cloud, the right on-premise system into the use case that we're looking to move to. And so we're talking about this kind of in order. We're doing the harder stuff first, which is determining the use case, which people can make mistakes there. But I think let's say we're picking a viable use case. We're talking about access to the information.
Yep.
Now it's a matter of building the generative AI system. The good news is, no matter what path you go down, you're going to build something that works, but there's only going to be one permutation of the solution that's going to be optimized for the amount of money you're looking to spend. So in other words, we're going to be able to build this thing using any number of different resources, and we're going to get to a working state most of the time. However, only one permutation, one configuration of resource is going to be optimized in terms of cost. So in other words, I can throw $10 million at building a generative AI system, say on the cloud-based system, where it's going to, burn $1 million a month in terms of cloud resources and CPUs. But if I'm overbuilding that system, it's not necessarily going to have the optimized value that's coming back to the business. And I know my propeller is spinning full blown. Let me state it another way. So in other words, it's a matter of matching up the resources, the amount of money you're looking to spend in a way where you're going to build something that's viable, but it's the minimum viable resources you're able to leverage. And so I think the knee-jerk reaction in this stuff, and I have these conversations all the time with people who are looking to build this stuff, is to throw as many resources that they can at this. In other words, they're going to build this thing using a very high-end GPU cluster. It's going to run on a cloud provider. It's going to cost them $500,000 a month, when they can do the same thing on an on-premise resource or in a managed service provider resource or on a micro cloud, a GPU cloud, which is able to do it for 1/4 of the money. However, and I think both of them will work. It's just one will work at a much more cost-efficient state and the ability to get to the performance expectations you're looking for. And those are the tougher conversations to have, I think we're having right now. And so, my advice is let's go through a process where we get to a configuration of whatever cloud providers, on-premise providers, run on my wristwatch, it doesn't matter, and not necessarily focused on throwing things that we know are kind of cool in the business. I understand the role of GPUs, and I think in many instances we're going to be using GPUs. They're an amazing technology. NVIDIA is doing amazing right now. They're going to continue to do amazing. But we're going to have other processes that come down the line which provide equivalent power and equivalent capabilities for cheaper prices. Also, we have the advantage of the emergence of the micro clouds, and those are basically smaller cloud providers that are just providing GPUs as a service, and they're able to provide GPUs at a fraction of the cost that the cloud providers are able to provide. That does not mean move your workloads off of cloud providers. That means look at the different architectural options that you have in building these systems. And I think that the knee jerk is going to be to spend more money than you need to spend and then normalize later. But the fact of the matter is, I think once you configure a system to use many more resources than it's needed, it's going to be very difficult to re-engineer that system. It's almost like changing tires on a truck that's rolling down the streets. What are your thoughts on this?
This is what I'm curious is how would one go about designing? How would one go actually designing a scalable performance solution for something that is as of yet unknown? Like, is there do you know what I mean? Like, if you have a particular use case and we say this might be the use case that will add value, and we go and we look at data, that was sort of the next chapter, and data is there and it's available. So we understand the size and scale of the data. We understand what we would like to achieve. How have you seen organizations actually take that conceptual ideas and translate them into, what do we actually need technology-wise? Do we need 100 GPUs or 1,000? Should we go left or right? Is this on-premise or is this in a micro cloud or with hyperscalers? Have you seen any models emerging that actually help people make such decisions? How do they make decisions like this?
I think it's a great question. It's the greatest question of the day. I don't think we don't have a standardized way of doing this that exists. Now, we do know how to do performance scaling and management, and those algorithms been around since we started doing, loading up. We were very good at that stuff in the 80s, by the way, because stuff was so expensive that we labored over the amount of resources we were leveraging for the use in a particular application. When everything got cheap, storage and compute and PCs were cheap and things like that, which it even is today, it wasn't a much thought around it. And so we kind of lost that art. And I think we do know how to understand how to make this happen. And you just kind of alluded to the way to think about this. In other words, we understand the data that's going to be used to train the data, train these systems. We understand the LLMs we're going to build, the size of those systems, and from that we can interpret how much processors are going to be needed to build the LLMs from the training data, as well as run the inference engine to deal with the prompts and deal with the APIs, the way in which we're querying the system. So we can do a model that's fairly accurate in terms of the performance requirements that are going to be for this particular environment. So we're going to be 100% accurate because we're going to have things that change over time. In other words, we're going to have one item takes off like a rocket and it's putting twice the load on the system, things like that. And we have some scaling capabilities need to do and make it happen. But it is going through the process that I think that most enterprises aren't going through. We kind of fell out of the habit, I think, in the last 20 years because things were cheap.
Exactly.
Storage was almost free, and CPUs and almost free. Based on what we paid for it in the 80s and most of the 90s. Access to cloud-based resources also commoditizes those assets. It's just when you look at what this stuff is going to cost, not only is it not free, but it's going to be very expensive based on the specialized needs of the processors, which I think is all well and good. So if we're going to use hyperscalers, we're going to use CPUs on these hyperscalers, they're going to have a certain cost load the optimization of it, I think it is going to pay to go through this exercise, to go through an architecture, to go through an optimization exercise, which I don't think is going to take as long as people think. And we talked about the data fixing. The data fixing is a much bigger problem to solve. In other words, you have bad data, you're going to have to fix that at some point in time, or else you're not necessarily going to have a competent LLM. The ability to have an optimized architecture is really a matter of going through the same process that we did many years ago, but getting to the point where we're looking at the requirements, we're modeling the performance model, we're modeling what the application is going to do and how it's going to grow, who's going to use it, what a peak state of saturation looks like, non-peak saturation state looks like, and then build an architecture which is going to be optimized for that particular usage. And it's not going to take weeks to do this. It's a very short period of time to make this assessment. And there's people out there that are figuring out how to do this right now using different tools and technologies to make it happen. You have people at Deloitte that do this, already, and and are amazing at it. And I think that we're going to have to get back to insisting that this kind of decision is being made, because I think that I'm not hearing a lot of talk at the cloud conferences in terms of going through this process. And that doesn't mean they don't want people to go through this process, but I think it's been tossed by the wayside now that we're getting around the hype of this technology. So this is a fundamental thing I think we can do to architect the system. It's going to save us a tremendous amount of money. But the best thing is it's going to return more value back to the business, because we're not spending $10 million a month on running a particular LLM within our business environment, which is going to be strategically valuable to the system. It may be strategically valuable to the business, but if we can do the same thing with $1 million a month versus $10 million a month, I think that's possible as well. And then we're able to return more value back to the business because the thing doesn't cost quite as much. What are your final thoughts on that?
The message, I think that the message here is what I'm taking away from this is don't assume that by default the way to do this is the easy way, is to get access through hyperscalers and leverage them. Don't get into that by default. Appreciate that there might be other better solutions architecturally, including building this on-premise using your own capital investments, and that the decisions you make on this are pretty significant and pretty, I don't want to call final, but it will be difficult to revert back, right? So it is really important to spend the appropriate right time to look at all the options and pick the one that architecturally fits best for what you need. Do not go to don't do what everybody else is doing, right? Because it might end up you might end up with a huge bill at the end, and the value will be lost.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's something that we need to do. And I think that that's on the critical path to us finding more value out of this stuff. So some of the other things, model development and deployment, your ability to select the right model. For example, we have to pick an LLM that's out there. So, ChatGPT 4.0, sorry, then Gemini and Llama. All those things are going to be out there, and that's fairly easy to do. I think if we've gone through the requirements selection stuff, the ability to figure out the model and the AI tools we need to build this thing is going to be a very quick decision. Because if we've done the right thing in understanding our requirements and have done the right thing in understanding our architecture and even the performance model that we just discussed, then picking the right model shouldn't be that difficult of a thing to do. And there's a limited number of ways in which you can do it. There's not hundreds of solutions out there. There's dozens, open source and proprietary. And so you get into that kind of selection process. Cloud service leverage for training and deployment, and also whether it's going to run on the cloud or not. Cloud's not necessarily going to be slam dunk for every generative AI system out there. And what I say all the time, cloud's the most convenient way to build a generative AI system now, because they have an ecosystem that's on demand. AWS gives you an amazing environment to build and deploy this technology. So does Google, so does Microsoft Azure. However, you do need to take a look at the pragmatic alternatives, the ability to use microclouds we just talked about. Also, in some cases, on-premise systems, private clouds may be a better alternative. I just wrote a blog that's publishing tomorrow in InfoWorld, how private clouds are making a return in popularity based on the emergence of AI, because in many instances they're building their AI systems on private clouds because they want to own the infrastructure for whatever reason. Maybe it's a monetary reason, that cost reason, things like that. So it is at this point, instead of, by the way, doing this in the first step, we're not saying we're going to use, AWS TensorFlow. You can go figure out how to make the stuff work. Go figure out what they need. This is figuring out what they need, figuring out the data environment, figuring out the training data, optimize architecture, those sorts of things, and then picking out the service and the platform we're going to use to make that happen, and doing so in that kind of an order. And I don't think a lot of that seems to be occurring these days, because you do think I think people are what I call architecting by conference or architecting by article. In other words, they look at the hype around a particular technology set, they decide that that is the way to go. And I understand why they're making those decisions. There's $1 billion of marketing that's driving them to that. And starting with the solution, the target solution, before understanding the requirements. And I think that this is probably 5 times as more important, that the architecture come into place, so we start asking the questions, we go through the strategic nature of it based on the importance of this technology, which is going to be a force multiplier times 100 for many organizations, and the importance of it. So don't start with the solution. Start with understanding what you're doing, what you need to do, picking the technology, things like that, and then how to deploy it, configuration management, containerization, all the options that are out there. And these things are kind of the easy decisions to make, as long as you know the sequence that they're made. You make this at the end of the sequence, not at the beginning of the sequence. What are your thoughts on this?
These are common sense best practices that we should have learned over the 50 years of IT existence in enterprises, right? So what really, Rajesh here put a question or comment in the Q&A saying, other takeaways here, like, have the proper use case first, treat your data first, get it ready first, then let that inform your appropriate architectural choices. Like, to me, this feels like we have to approach this in a mature adult way, not be tempted to run with the herd, because the herd might be actually running towards the wrong direction. But instead, don't be tempted. Learn, but understand there are other options, and make sure to pick the option that is the right fit for exactly what you need to get. Like, I'm almost saying this and it sounds obvious, but I completely understand that these people are under a lot of pressure to create something fast, and that this actually creates tension and potential risk. And that could be another reason why people might be defaulting to go with the herd, right? And I think that what you're saying here is try to contain yourself, not do that. Invest at proper time in proper sequence that will get you the right answer in the end.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think we just need to learn from some of the mistakes I think we made around cloud adoption,
Yes.
10, 15 years ago. And I think that we didn't derail the company in doing that, but we have a kind of a duty to the business in doing this the right way the first time, which I think is going to be very important. So go through the stepwise things you need to make it happen. And I understand why people are moving in that direction. And I understand why they're starting with a particular product and then working their way into a technology. Sometimes the company will pick them as a core partner, and all these sorts of things occur. But that's all fine and good. But it's very important that we understand what we're doing going through it. So you need to do the monitoring and improvements. Monitor performance, utilization of FinOps or efficiencies, the ability to continuously improve the system, and you're going to find, if you're building a tactical LLM for use within your business that's leveraging other major LLMs that people are leveraging as a service, you're still going to have to continuously improve that system and improve that knowledge and model and information. So you're not necessarily rebuilding the entire LLM. It's going to be too expensive to do that on a daily basis, but we're updating it with new information. We're using RAG, the ability to reach out in the backend systems to find additional validating references for the data. We're putting lots of stuff in it that's going to make the thing much more reliable and much more useful to the business. You got to remember that we're building this stuff, we're launching it out. We're going to have a PR issue to get over initially, because users, non-technical users, people that know what AI is and know the fun stuff around it, are going to evaluate your generative AI system on their ability to enhance their jobs and make their life easy, make customers' lives easier, make the product development easier. And you have to do the monitoring, the optimization, all this kind of stuff, and all the maintenance that comes along with it. So don't necessarily push this out. I think most people understand we still need monitoring, observability, and maintenance for this stuff. There needs to invest in cost optimization, continuous improvement, continuous training. So operations is really where the thing is going to be proved. So invest in this stuff. What are your thoughts on this?
I would just have to agree with you on that one. This is, yeah, absolutely. I don't think have anything to add. I think you just summarized this very, very, very well.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. So we are charting here really a model of how an organization should approach this. We had a question that came up, like, is there a emerging set of good practices or emerging capability model or emerging guidelines somewhere that is going to actually help organization package all this up and help guide them through this process from that sort of board education that is essential and needed, all the way through to the guideline around how does one make architectural choices. Is there anything that you see emerging, or perhaps is what you are building potentially has an opportunity to become something like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the courses, things like that, outline a methodology, which is more of a high level methodology, but there's lots of details and they be had behind this. And what's going on is we're seeing the emergence of tactical guidance. Cloud Security Alliance just released a bunch of tactical general guidance around building security models for generative AI systems, which is helpful because it does provide an aspect in terms of how we're going to thread security development in these systems. Observability, the same thing. FinOps, the same thing. So the FinOps organization, FinOps.org, is building guidance and building observability and cost observability and this stuff. So we're getting lots of organizations that are figuring out aspects of this and figuring out tactical use cases. As far as a larger model, which we're getting into, as far as the steps you need to go, a methodology you need to go, a checklist for understanding, things like that, those are emerging in bits and pieces, but you're not getting this holistic understanding. I do think that the consulting firms, Deloitte included, are going to come out with guidance where that is going to be a holistic capability model and understanding your maturation of these systems and how to build them properly, how to go through the data assessment, how to go through the security assessment, governance assessment, how to select the right generative AI models, those sorts of things, because there's going to be a lot of investment, in building that kind of collateral. You can certainly get it in my courses and some of my writing, but you can't write everything you need to understand about doing this in a framework and an understanding. And I think that's under development now in many places. We'll probably see it emerge toward the end of the year. That's a great question. I mean, it's a blank space right now in the space, other than the tactical guidance we're getting, which I think is fine. Holistically, some sort of a place I can point them to, like TOGAF for generative AI systems. I don't. It doesn't exist, and so it's something that's going to have to be kind of one-off, created and customized for your particular usage and domain. And also keep that in mind that whatever someone's building, they don't understand you as a company, so you're going to have to craft your own threads to those environments. But those are helpful, these existing methodologies, because they give you a checklist of understanding, very much like how pilots go through a checklist before they take a plane off, to make sure we're asking the questions that need to be asked and we're addressing things that need to be asked. And I think it's very important. So we'll see some of that IP emerge. What I was really kind of surprised at, there doesn't seem to be a lot of books out there on how to do this. And I think that it's probably a 2-year latency. I'm sure they're being written by some of the architects that are out there. We'll see more IP and understanding. But we're ahead, where this is a case where the technology kind of got ahead of the thinking, and now the thinking is matching to the technology. We didn't think about this, and the technology.
That's a great observation, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that. That's a great observation. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Technology has jumped ahead. We are catching up.
We're catching up, and I think that's the honest answer of it. And I think people will push back. I mean, they say, well, we have the answer. I haven't seen it yet. And I think you have to be very skeptical if people are, popping, certainly if it's a product or a service. This is IP. This is very deep IP. This comes into thinking in multiple dimensions and thinking about security and data. AI engineering, all these facets of it come into play here. And if you don't have the deeper understanding, this stuff isn't going to be very useful for you.
Yeah.
So architectural approaches, centralized versus decentralized. We can do this stuff at the edge. We don't necessarily have to do this in a single set of processors within a data center or a cloud provider. I built systems before where they're running aspects of IoT-based systems where AI is running at the edge of the systems. Those are perfectly fine, and there's a reason why you do that. You got to remember that these LLMs, at the end of the day, they're not very big. They're 128 gigabytes for a small functional version of them. That's built from, say, 5 petabytes of data, and so they can run on lower powered devices, on Raspberry Pis, things like that, watches, things like. So we are going to see some tactical use of some of this generative AI that's going to exist in very small underpowered processors. I do know generative AI systems are running on drones. So it's a little processor sitting on a DJI drone that's sitting 200 feet above the planet, that's looking at soil saturation and making decisions about that based on knowledge engine that's carrying along. That's very tactically focused. It's not GPT, but it's perfectly going to be functional for what you're using. Yeah. Modular versus monolithic, deployment simplicity, things like that. So we have to do the normal stuff there. And I don't think that's anything new. And then the cloud versus on-premise stuff, and not getting wrapped around the axle with going one way or the other. So the concern would be if you walk into a room to kick off a meeting and they tell you we're doing the AWS generative AI project. And it's okay, well, are we doing the HP GreenLake AI project? In other words, they pre-picked a platform.
Yeah, exactly.
And now we're backing stuff into it. So we need to pick the platform as kind of the end state and kind of last start of the process. In fact, if you take anything away from this, and I'm oversimplifying things here on purpose for the frame of the discussion that we're having. The more important things are at the beginning of the presentation. The less important things are at the end, but it's still important that we're picking the platforms and picking the technology solution once we have a full understanding of the data, the requirements, things like that. So what are your thoughts on this?
It completely follows the logic we discussed. We absolutely does, right? So I think that the message continues to be, please, leaders, let's take this in a mature way and apply the lessons of the last 4 decades. Let us not rush into it. Let us not commit too early. Let us not follow the herd. Let us start with business problem and business opportunity, and let's take that through a logical sequence by the book that doesn't yet exist, but the logical sequence of what we have learned in the past, right? That continues to be the message. This was fascinating, David. We are coming to the end of our time. I would love to ask you to maybe let us know where you think this is heading. What do you see might be emerging as good practices in the next maybe a year, couple of years out? What do you expect? How do you expect this unfolding in the future?
Well, I think that we're going to get into more discussions like you and I just had. I think people understand that those discussions are very important and need to be made right now in terms of use cases and data, data infrastructure, all that stuff needs to be part of it. And I think we're going to have conferences, we're going to have intellectual groups that start to emerge, and guys, firms like Deloitte and the other consulting firms out there, I think are going to lead the way, because we have to think hard and fast about how we use this technology to the correct end states of the business. And I think this is not going to happen accidentally. So we need to purposely figure out what we need to build.
And there are, as we just identified, there are significant gaps that are industry-wide gaps, like emergence of good practices, guidelines, checklists, controls, governance elements. This is the moment where people who have curiosity and interest ought to lean in and contribute. This is the moment to contribute, right? And have your personal impact to what we know is going to be a big game changer for the society as a whole. So maybe a conversation like this will compel people to say, you know what, I actually want to make a choice and lean in deeper, because at this moment in history, I have time to actually make some influence certain things and be part of something big emerging. Just like you are.
It's a great career path. You're welcome.
Right? That's exactly it. That's exactly actually the path you're on, right?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, that's the path I'm on, but other people can join me on the path.
There we go. That would be the call for action on this call. Thank you. David, this was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We learned a lot here. And I really love the fact that you are taking this concept and bringing it down to the ground and making it practical for people. This is, I think, very, very important. Thank you very much, David. The session has been recorded. I will soon send the link to the recording so you can review it. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. And thank you all very much. Have yourselves a lovely Wednesday afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.